Dear Redditors, what's the most eerie, unsettling thing you've ever encountered while hiking, and/or in the woods? Grew up living in rural Arkansas. I lived right on the edge of town at one point and a buddy's house was a few miles away. Quickest way to get there was walk along the train tracks, so I'm walking to his house one night and it's dark, like dark, wasn't a moon out and there's nothing on either side for a good while, but that's woods. It's not unusual to hear things running around and for the most part they're harmless, but when it's pitch black in middle of the night, you don't think harmless. I'm crunching along on the gravel when I hear something crashing through the woods off to my left. I stop walking to listen and it stops after a second. I start walking along again and something starts rushing through the brush and I hear it crunch through the gravel right in front of me and stop what sounds like a few feet away. I froze and am just trying to see anything when I hear loud snort and it crunches off and into the woods again. An hour later, while I'm sitting in a house with lights on everywhere, I thought about how I wish it was daylight so I could see how close the deer came to me. At the time it happened, all I could think was, this is it. This is how I die. Some horrible monster is about to drag me into the woods and eat me. Some dude just shitting in a 5-gallon bucket. Not on a trail. No possessions with him. Just like he grabbed his shit bucket and went to his place to take a shit. More of a recurring experience. Hearing sounds near my tent in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. My experience and knowledge of the area might tell me that it's an animal, but my ears might be 100% convinced that it's the footsteps of another man walking up to my tent. It's like having a bad trip on drugs. Takes some mental gymnastics to get through. Definitely my least favorite part about solo hiking. Oh boy, have one. Okay, so me and my family were hiking along a trail during our camping trip and promptly got lost. In our attempt to get back to the road, we stumbled upon a really weird place, with stick walls, a tarp tent, a deer carcass in a fire pit, a large do not enter sign, and a bunch of other creepy things. We found it odd, but left and went back to the campsite. When we told the family we were staying with, they got really quiet and asked what he didn't see you. Did he? We said no, and they were really relieved and said to never go back. They would not elaborate, and just said he was not fond of strangers. Creepy as hell. In high school, some friends and I would often cruise the back roads of our small town and break into abandoned house and use our video camera to capture ghosts videos. One night we drove by a very deep ravine that was dried up and the ground was covered in leaves. I said we should check it out and see who would go furthest into the ravine. 3 of us went in and the other 3 stayed behind, saying it was way too scary to check out. While we were walking, we saw an empty gallon jug, then came across a piece of blue clothing, then some other trash. We didn't have the flashlight on to add to the effect. We just turned it on every now and then to see things better. The moon was full, but it was very hard to see because of all the tree coverage. Suddenly a cold chill ran down my back and I felt like we weren't alone. I froze. My friends stopped immediately with me. I know they felt what I felt. We could hear a rush of branches breaking and leaves crunching. It was all around us at the top of the ravine. My friend shined his light and we could see people rushing all around us. We turned around and ran the way we came, just into darkness. I'm so amazed none of us fell. We got to the car and started pounding on it. We jumped in and I got into the driver's seat and we floored it out of there. We were deep in the woods about 20 miles from town but rushed home and all of us talking at once. We had been warned before by authorities to stay out of the woods. That terrible things happened there, but we didn't listen. Things could have ended much differently for us. We are lucky we made it back home. Told the story before, but I grew up next to the forest. My siblings and I knew the place like the back of our hands. We were always out in those woods. One day the whole family went for a hike. Early afternoon, summertime. plenty of sunlight. We were down at the creek, place we'd gone to a trillion times. Brother and I spotted a hill we'd never noticed before, decided to climb up and see what was up there. We told our family where we were going. They said they'd follow us. I heard my mom talking behind us as we ascended the hill. Got to the top, and that's when we noticed the rest of the family didn't follow. It's just my brother and I. Well, okay, no big deal. Well, look around and head back. We spent maybe 30 minutes tops exploring and looking around, then went back down the hill. It was still a bright sunny day, hot as hell. We get to the bottom of the hill and it's suddenly really dark, like a massive cloud just eclipsed the sun, and it feels cooler than it did a minute ago, and I don't see my family where we left them. We backtrack the way we came to get to the hill and find my hysterical mother some ways down the path. She sees us and is now screaming at us for scaring her and just vanishing like that. My brother and I don't know what the fuck she's talking about. We were gone 30 minutes and she was supposed to be following us. Through a very heated discussion we find out from my mom's perspective she followed us up the hill. We crested the hill and then suddenly my brother and I were gone. No trace of us. We weren't responding to her calling out to us. We weren't answering our cell phones. Mom, her husband, and my other brother spent all afternoon searching for us. Walked miles of woods yelling our names, and as it was now 8 p.m. they were getting ready to call the police because they thought something serious happened to us. Somehow, my brother and I went up the hill in the early afternoon, did not leave the hill, spent 30 minutes exploring, then came back down but lost several hours in the process with no memory of how that happened. My mom says she looked all over the hill for us, and despite never leaving the hill, we never saw or heard each other. Neither of us had any missed calls on our phones, but my mom's phone showed multiple missed calls to us. We weren't muddy or cut up, weren't particularly thirsty or hungry, so there's no way we wandered off the sides of the hill. As it was mud and briars, no real evidence that we'd walked any further than the top of the hill and back. Just somehow poofed out of existence for a few hours. The next time we went to the creek, the hill was gone. Hiked all over looking for it but never found it. I have no logical explanation for the experience. Animals and people never really freaked me out in the woods, but spontaneously getting lost without a trace for 6+ hours really freaked me out. 1 minute you're hiking, the next you're just gone. The walking things that follow you. Almost every day, my friend and I used to walk in the woods by his place. When walking, we'd hear the sound of footsteps alongside us, behind us, ahead of us, all around. It sounded like people walking in the woods. If we stopped walking, the sound of steps would stop. If one of us walked and the other stood still, there was no sound of footsteps. We had to both walk. This went on for years. We'd stand still and look everywhere and see nothing. Nothing but the trees. Take a few steps, and we'd immediately hear people walking around us. One day, we were walking down the road, instead of in the woods, and we heard the same noise of footsteps from the woods. We looked into the woods and there was a little tiny bird. It was hopping in the leaves at exactly human walking pace. 2 years of worry for a 4-inch tall hopping bird. They didn't live in my woods, but they were all over his woods. It was nice to solve a problem with a happy ending. I don't know if this counts because it was staged, but when our groups of families would go camp, the adults had a tradition where they would do a scary hike or something like that. One of the dads would go off and pretend to be a monster or something to put on a show for the older kids. Being 5, 6 years old, I was pretty scared, and when we were running from the monster, my dad accidentally tripped. To make it more dramatic, he said, "Oh no, go on without me." So we ran and left him behind, and I was bawling because I legitimately thought my dad just died. When I saw him coming back to the campsite, I was very confused, but relieved. The worst part was that both my parents had gone to a funeral of a father from our church who had died that morning, so my mom was not happy. Was in the desert camping, and took a hike as it was getting dark, got quite a ways out and turned on my UV light to see if I could find any scorpions. Turns out they found me because, by the time I turned my light on, there had to have been 10 within 5 meters of me. Noped out of there real fast while pissing my pants. I watched this story on YouTube actually. I was diving down a rabbit hole and came across this show from the early 90s that had paranormal stories. I usually don't get freaked out watching this sort of stuff at 2 p.m. during the day, but this one got me. I can't seem to find the video as the data didn't save for me. If I find it again, I will post it. This man was driving home when his car broke down at night. He went to a local diner to ask where he could get help and was told to walk a mile or so down the road. On the way, a car pulled up beside him with a man offering him a ride. The man said, "I will give you a ride," in a tone that was very high. He gets in. Throughout the journey they start talking and the driver starts talking about some celebrity. The man said, when he mentioned the person, he said it was the creepiest feeling he has ever had in his life. The sound of his voice mentioning it was incredibly eerie. So turns out the driver gave him his card, with a number on the back. He owned a restaurant or club. The next day, it was mentioned on the news that the person the driver was talking about had died. He said he was so disturbed by it, he called the number on the back of the card asking for the driver only to receive angry answers. Eventually a woman answered and said, "Please don't call here again. Was my husband and he has been dead the past 2 years." I can't remember how it came up, but he had asked her had her husband a high voice, and she said no, he had a very deep voice. How the man had died was by suicide. He shot himself in the throat. Woods in upstate NY, infamous. No cars in parking lot, deep in trails. Encounter an old man who stops me to chat. No big deal. He asks me if I'm Celtic. Huh? No man, I don't think so. He says too bad these woods are watching you and they'd like you better. How'd he get out there? I was thinking on the drive home. The rest of the hike I was thinking what a weird thing to say. Now I think WTF. While at a large lake in my state, my friend Levi and I were sitting in our camper alone. It was super dark outside and his mother and her ex-BF weren't back yet. We were just talking and I saw in the window behind him something move. I said they're back. He turned around to put his face up against the window. He looked back to me confused. There is literally nothing. I got up and looked, saw nothing. Then opened the door just in time to see a guy dip behind some bushes. A while later they came back and we were hiding in the bathroom. He went out and checked and just said it was our imaginations from being so exhausted from swimming. I'm still creeped out lol. It was a campsite so there were other people, but why were they watching our camper? I once took a hike around some trails that were near to me. I'm surrounded by woods. At one point there was a fork in the trail and I saw a sign with an arrow on it pointing to one of the trails. So I decided to follow it. After about a half hour of walking I came upon a very old looking home. This was in the dead middle of the woods, with lights on. It looked like there was people in there but no one was moving. I noped right the fuck out of there and made my way home, where I got my phone and checked Google Earth, and found the trail but no building. I went back the next day in the daylight and the trail was a dead end with absolutely nothing there. It still bothers me to this day. I was hiking with some friends, just off the trail near our camping spot. The woods suddenly opened up to a small clearing. In the center was a very large, white oak with no leaves. All of the other trees were almost in a perfect circle, as if keeping away from it. Staring at it gave a very creepy vibe. We started heading back to our tents, but the hike seemed to take 3 times as long going back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the big white oak was right behind us the whole way. I fixing fences with my dad on our farm in the Midwest. Walking through the woods in the middle of the day, we noticed a great horned owl on a branch directly above us, like 12 feet away. We slowly kept working and keeping an eye on it. It followed us for like 30 minutes. It always stayed on limbs directly above where we were. After we fixed the fence, we started walking back to our truck. In a tree directly in our path was a baby owl about the size of a football. In that moment, the adult came to land next to the chick and seemed to snuggle up to it as if to say, "Don't come any closer." We backed away and walked a different route out of the woods. One of the craziest but coolest experiences I've ever had. Fresh, deep claw marks on a tree trunk. It was in Northern California, so we assumed it was a mountain lion. We were about 1.5 hours from the trailhead. Heading back, there were 3 of us, 2 guys, 1 girl, so enough to be intimidating, but for me that still didn't erase that gut feeling of knowing I wasn't the predator in this situation. Unsettling. That's easy. So deep in the woods I wandered off the path to take a crap, pants down, squatted, actively dropping a log, and I notice right in front of me, like 2 feet from my face, hidden in plain sight among the leaves on the ground. A rattlesnake, I swear. As soon as I made eye contact it noticed and started to rattle, freaking the fuck out. For about the next 10-15 seconds, I continued to drop logs. After what seemed like eternity it stopped making noise and I slowly, really fucking slowly, stood up enough to begin backing away. Once I was 10 feet away or so I felt safe, cleaned up, pants up, and that fucker was still staring at me. Then I just breathed a bunch of deep breaths and walked away. Taking a night hike while camping as a kid. Even before leaving for the hike I had a really weird feeling and brought the small camping hatchet we had with us on the hike. The feeling got worse through the hike, eventually made it down to the river and the feeling was too hard for me to ignore anymore, so I started shining the flashlight at the tree line. As soon as I got halfway through my scan, one part of the hillside started to rustle as something charged up the hill. Pretty freaky to me as a kid. I used to have a favorite mountain trail for running. One winter morning I was on my run and started to see drops of blood here and there. I kept running and the frequency of the drops increased and became occasional spurts, lines. These increased and I got the fuck out of there. Was probably nothing super bad, but I wasn't interested in finding out. Land nav at Hurlburt Field in 1991. Came across what looked to be an old campsite with a pair of cowboy boots on sticks like they were drying out. Not unsettling, just weird. Hiking in Colorado when I first moved there, heard what I thought at the time was a woman screaming, didn't see anyone else on the trail. Got home and roommate played a video for me. It was a mountain lion screaming. That is a horrible sound from a terrifying animal. Belanglo State Forest south of Sydney is notorious for being the site of the backpacker murders where 6 bodies were found in the early 90s. A few years back I was part of a large, 1,000-plus people, scout camp in the forest. It's a nice spot but it still feels odd. Everyone knows the history of the place. Even the kids are joking about killers in the woods. About 9 p.m. there's a queue for the toilets, so I duck into the woods to relieve myself. About 30 meters into the trees I look down and realize I'm standing in a small scattered field of bones. It probably only took a few seconds for me to realize they were animal bones, but it was the longest few seconds of my life. I was hiking in an unknown piece of land and there was a coyote covered in blood and its neck halfway torn apart. About 3 miles away I found a filleting knife in a tree. That is why I don't go there anymore. Me and my friends were riding our bikes in the woods. All of a sudden he stoops his bike in front of me and tells me to run. I asked why and tried to grab my bike, but they said leave the bikes and run. We ran backwards out of the woods, and when we got out I asked him what happened, and he said he saw someone in a grey hoodie run across the path with a chainsaw. This is the same woods that we found a dead horse in while exploring one day. I was once camping, and in the middle of the night I had to go to the restroom. While I was going I heard distinctive steps. I was with a big group so I didn't think much about it at first, but I did a full loop around the tent and nobody was there or in eyesight.